Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jeanette Chitjian, and for those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm the Director of Enrollment Management and Community Engagement at Marlborough School. This is our last, but perhaps our most important event of 2020. We want to spend tonight talking about financial aid, financial assistance, how families afford a Marlborough experience. So tonight, we're fortunate to have not one, but two of my colleagues who partner with the admissions office and support our families through this application process. Before I introduce them, I want you to know that our time together includes opportunities for you to ask questions. Some of you submitted questions ahead of time, which I will add to our conversations. And I want you to feel welcome to add even more questions as they come up through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We've disabled the chat, so I'm hoping that you'll use that Q&A button, and I'll try to get to those, as many of those as we can tonight. I know that Nick and John have saved time in the presentation for us to be able to make this be really your evening and to drive at least a portion of it based on the questions that are on your mind. I want you to know that we are recording the conversation tonight, so we'll be able to hopefully post it for families who either are unable to be with us, or if you want to go back and revisit some of this conversation. So first, I'm going to introduce you to our two colleagues and then pass it over to them. John Amussen is our business officer manager and also controller, and Nick Hernandez is our head of finance. So I'm going to let Nick introduce himself, share a little bit about his responsibilities and his background, and we're off and running. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette, and welcome everyone. Of course, we much prefer to be together in person, but I guess Zoom is the next best thing. We're all adjusting to this pandemic, and we're really grateful and appreciative that you're carving out time tonight to be with us. So this is my 15th year here at Marlborough School. I'm the Associate Head for Finance and Administration, as Jeanette noted. And that means essentially that I, together with my colleagues in the business office, in human resources, auxiliary services, facilities management, we oversee the operations of the school, everything from financial aid and budget planning to the cafeteria to bus transportation, you name it. The way I like to describe it is basically everything but the actual stuff that happens in the classroom. We leave that to people that are far more experienced than we are in that regard. So welcome again. I'm going to turn it over to John in a little bit, but before I do that, really, I want to just share there are really two goals that we have for tonight, for this evening, for you. As Jeanette said, really encourage you to ask questions, use the Q&A. We really want to hear from you. It's really important. The first goal is really just to demystify and walk you through and talk about what the process is and what's involved in the process. There's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of questions, I'm sure. John will walk you through that and hopefully demystify a lot of that. So we hope that at a very minimum, you get that information. And two, perhaps more importantly, that you apply, that you really not be discouraged, that you use this opportunity to consider Marlborough. The fact that you're here today, I think, is the first important step, but really want to encourage you to apply. We won't know whether you qualify for financial aid until you do that. So please, if there's anything to walk away with in terms of this presentation today, it's to apply, okay? My mom used to tell me that, she would rather have regrets for the things that she's done than for the things that she didn't do. Of course, that shouldn't apply to everything in life. Some things you do have to, manage to pull back on, but as it relates to this, you don't want to have any regrets. So please, if there's anything, we want to encourage you to apply, okay, for financial aid. So with that, again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to John Amussen, and he'll introduce himself and take it away.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Nick and Jeanette. Welcome. I'm happy to be here with you tonight and talk about this subject. I've been at Marlborough for my second year, and I've been in the independent school world for about 6.5 years. So I've been doing a lot of financial aid. And to Nick and Jeanette's point, it's really important to, if this is the way that you can send your daughter to Marlborough, then you should do it. So I'm going to pop up my screen. It'll give me a moment here. And I'm hoping people can see my slide, and Jeanette or Nick can give me a thumbs up. Okay. So here we are. We also want to talk about demystifying the process. So this is the first thing. Most of you probably know this, but it's not a loan. It is a grant. You don't have to pay it back. Unlike large parts of college aid where it's a loan that incurs debt for the student, this does not happen in this case. So when you get an aid package at Marlborough or any other independent school for that matter, they have essentially forgiven that obligation for you. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. This is why we have financial aid, and Jeanette can talk to this a little bit, but if you want students who couldn't otherwise afford to come to Marlborough or an independent school to have that opportunity, you want the school to have a diverse population and the academic strength of people who might not otherwise be able to afford an independent school education. And of course, we continue to support students who attend the school and have gotten financial aid in the first place. So this is the second important point. What we calculate as your need may be a little different from what you perceive as your need. And by that, I mean that, and we'll get into the process in a little bit, but the algorithm that takes all the information you provide and comes up with what it calls an estimated family contribution makes assumptions about your spending, discretionary and non-discretionary. And the idea is that you'll prioritize the cost of the independent school tuition, and that this financial aid is there to subsidize an education, but not to subsidize lifestyle so much. So that's why there may be differences. And when you get an award that's different from what you might have asked for, that's what's going into that calculation. So how do we determine financial need? If you apply for financial aid, if you've started applying, you already know this, you will go to a third-party portal. We use SSS. There's another one called FAST. There's another one called TADS. TADS and SSS are actually part of the same umbrella organization, and they're slightly different, but not enough to be terribly important for the purposes of aid. They collect all your tax documents. I will tell you that no school wants you to email tax documents to them. You want to go to these portals, which have significant security protocols to protect your data. So you submit those documents, you submit estimates of income and expenses, and then these portals figure out, calculate your ability to pay based on your income, assets and liabilities, how big your family is, how many students you have in tuition charging schools. You might have other circumstances. There might be medical bills. You might be taking care of an elderly parent. The variability is large. There's a lot of factors that can go into this. But needless to say, that means that two families that have the similar incomes may have very different financial need as calculated by the portal based on their expenses and their obligations. And as I said before, all schools will expect families to prioritize the cost of education. So, fast facts about financial aid at Marlborough. Our budget for next year is $4 million. And that is a lot of money. And we will end up using almost all of it. I think that demonstrates our commitment to having a diverse socioeconomic class and getting all the students who are qualified to attend Marlborough to actually come to Marlborough. Right now, exactly 1 in 5 students at Marlborough receive some financial assistance. The average award amount this year was 72% of tuition, or nearly $32,000. We grant awards in specific increments. So we grant from 10% to 100% in increments of 5% of tuition. And then that award percentage is applied to other costs. So if your child takes the bus transportation will be subsidized by your financial aid percentage. Same with books, technology, trips, et cetera, et cetera. So the award percentage is across the board. The biggest misconception about financial aid, and especially in a city like Los Angeles with a high cost of living, is there's no way I would qualify for financial assistance. I make too much money. 85% of our families on aid have incomes over $100,000. Almost half of them over 200,000. 20% of them have incomes over 300,000. So another way of putting this is the distribution of incomes. There are actually more people making over $300,000 on aid than under $100,000 on aid. The biggest group is the group making between 100,000 and 200,000. That's an income level that can afford some of the school, but not all of the school. And we want families who would normally think, I won't get aid, to apply for aid, because if it's a difference between sending your daughter to Marlborough and not, give yourself the chance to do that. So here are the tips I have for financial aid. Every school is a little bit different. They have their own process. They prioritize different things. They might use a different portal. They might have different deadlines. So find out what the school does, how they handle it. When you're applying, indicate your interest in financial aid. That allows us to follow up and make sure if you're applying that you have actually applied, because if you don't do that, then what can happen is we don't have an application for financial aid and you might get in, but you don't have assistance, and it may be too late to get money out of the pool. So let us know so we can be aware of your interest. Talk to someone from the school, and that would be Jeanette or Christine in enrollment management. They would be good people to talk with. If it's a technical question, they'll send you over to me in all likelihood. But don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what we're here for. And this is really important. Most schools do not want you to try and get in without aid and then next year say, oh, by the way, I need aid. That Marlborough is very, very reluctant to do that. You have to have a significant change in circumstance. Now, I will say that this year, COVID became a significant change in circumstance for quite a few families, and we did, in fact, offer aid to people who weren't receiving it before, because, of course, those were legitimate changes. But do not assume that if you apply without aid, apply without applying for aid the first year, that you will be able to get it down the road unless things are very different for you in the future. So that's just a heads up. If you don't think you can afford the tuition for 4 years or 6 years at Marlborough, apply now. And then, as Jeanette was saying, as Nick was saying, if you don't know if you'll qualify, or if you think you don't, apply anyway. That's the only way to find out. Sometimes people will ask me, will I get aid? And they'll talk about their situation. The answer is, I have no idea, because there's so many factors that go into this, and the personal financial statement is fairly detailed. I don't know if you'll get aid, or even if I know that you'll get aid in all likelihood, I have no idea what that is. So go through the process. I've noticed some questions that popped up. I don't know if Jeanette thinks I should answer them now.
The one that's popped up that kind of goes along with what you just said, John, is there an average award within each of those income bands?
There is. I mean, and as you would expect, the average award for families making under 100,000 is much less. Most of the families making under 100,000 are getting aid in the neighborhood of 90% up to 100%. 100 to 200, it's probably closer to our average award, somewhere between 50 and 70, 75%. When you get to over 200 to 300,000, then you're getting the assistance that's less than half of tuition. Those are very rough numbers. And again, as I said, two families with the same income might have very different aid amounts depending on what their various obligations are. So that helps. Anything else, or?
I have one more, which is along the lines of what you said, John, that within this whole COVID situation that we're in, we've had significant changes in income. And so I guess the question is, you've answered, which is how we've taken into consideration that this was a family's financial situation for this year. But I think sort of the bigger question is, do I get the same financial aid every year?
So the short answer is probably, but you do reapply for aid every year. If circumstances haven't changed materially in one direction or another, your aid percentage will probably stay the same. And that's, that's a commitment sort of in two directions that we're making to support the family through 6 years or 4 years of Marlborough. And the family is saying, if they agree to the aid package, I agree that I will pay this over time. Obviously, we have situations where people lose jobs, or one of the providers in the family gets sick and income changes, and then obviously we'll change it. But similarly, if someone gets a big promotion and is making 50% more income, then we would probably look at cutting back on the aid a little bit. We want to give people the aid they need, but we also want people to provide what they can provide given their current circumstances.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to keep asking some of the questions that were submitted, and by all means, keep typing questions into the Q&A as well. A question that has to do with, does it make a difference if I apply earlier or later for financial aid? And if it's advantageous to apply earlier, why?
It does not make a difference. We have a deadline for financial aid, which I think is January 10th. And don't quote me because I don't have a calendar in front of me right now. And it's hard enough for me to know what day it is right now, as opposed to know what days of the week happen in January. But I think it's a Sunday night, and I think it's the 10th. And the one thing I'll say is that that's when we want you to have filled out your personal financial statement and have provided as much documentation as you can, understanding that you probably almost certainly do not have your 2020 1040 completed and signed on the 10th of January. We do expect that to be submitted to us by April 15th, but we know that people do their taxes later in the year than January. But that's where we get a start, and then those applications are evaluated. We meet and review them a little later in January after they're reviewed by internally and by SSS. So there is no advantage. I mean, the advantage for you of doing it early is you're done. I highly recommend that just because it's always good to be done. But if you get it in at 11:59 on the night of January 10th, we will not look askance at your application. So.
And John, you're right. January 10th is the deadline.
If I could just add one thing on the tax returns, I just want to clarify. So as John mentioned, we're going through a pretty exhaustive process once all the applications are submitted, and we have to make decisions because obviously we have to send out enrollment letters. And whatever communication or decisions are made as far as financial aid are contingent. They're based on your tax returns that we will receive. So if you end up submitting your 2020 tax returns on or around the deadline of April 15th. And if there's a significant material change relative to what you originally included in the application process, we'll notify you, obviously, and we'll have a separate communication and talk through those issues. So it's important to make sure that even though your taxes aren't completed, hopefully you have a good sense as to what your profile is going to look like. So we make sure we take an accurate look at that.
And part of the some of the forms that come in, if you're you receive salary, we want to see W-2s, and even if you don't have W-2s, you probably know what the number is because your last paycheck of the year will tell you within a few dollars of what a W-2 would be. You know, if not, it should be exact, but there might be looking at a different box. But you can get a lot of that information in by January 10th. The actual tax form is really for verification of what you've claimed for the previous year. The other thing I'd say about the form, there's space in the SSS application and actually in every one of these portals, there's space for you to put in a narrative. And the narrative really, really helps us to understand what's going on. If you've changed jobs, if you rely on bonuses that may change based on economic circumstances, and so your base salary is one thing, but your total compensation may be something else depending on what the bonuses are. Anything like that is incredibly helpful. The more transparent you are with us, the easier it is for us to discern what the correct and fair level of assistance is. So that would be my plea as someone who goes through this and sometimes is asking what's going on with this family. Tell us what's going on. That's the best advice I can give you, and I think that applies to pretty much every situation, every school.
Thank you. Does Marlborough offer academic scholarships?
Well, I'm going to kick that back to you, Jeanette.
All of our financial aid is based on financial need. So no academic scholarships, leadership scholarships, athletic awards. It's really based on a family's financial need.
And that, by the way, there are professional organizations for schools, and one of them is the National Association of Independent Schools, and they have best practice for financial aid, and that's one of the best practices, that financial aid is need-based, and we follow that. We follow that dictate.
What if we may not need aid now, but we will need aid when our second child applies? Do we still apply now?
I would say yes. And the reason is that, and what may happen, and again, this is where that comment section is really, really helpful, and say, we know we may not qualify this year, but we want you to know that we expect that when our second child hits independent school, then we will not be able to afford tuition for both children in schools without assistance. And then you will not run askance of our policy of not granting aid if you haven't applied for aid in the first place, because you applied for aid. And if you let us know the situation, then we're aware of it and can look forward to it and know what's coming. So yes, you should apply and explain the situation, even though you think you can afford it for the year when you only have one child in a tuition charging school.
A question that I get often in the admissions process is, does applying for financial aid put my daughter into a more competitive application process? And the answer is yes, it does. Marlborough is committed to awarding financial aid to every, let me back up, sorry. Every admitted student who applies for financial aid, no, let me say that again. How do I say this? When Marlborough admits students, we want to make sure that they have the ability to afford their tuition. So if we are admitting a student, and they qualify for financial aid, we are also offering them an award. As you might guess, our financial aid budget we're not able to cover every single student who applies for an award. And so when we run out of money, then some of those students end up on the wait list. I hope that makes sense. We do not waitlist for financial aid. We do not admit a student and then tell them if you can figure out how to afford Marlborough, you can come. So we go through admissions, we look at our financial aid budgets, and then we send out our excuse me, decisions at the same time. I'm looking at John and Nick. Can you say that any clearer than I did? Because I don't think I.
That's exactly right. I mean, if your application through the financial aid process does play into the decision as far as admission. And so to Jeanette's point, if you apply for aid and this is important, and qualify for aid and get admitted, you will receive that aid that you qualify for. Similarly, if you apply for financial aid and we determine that you don't qualify for aid, there may be a situation where you would be admitted, but again, right, Jeanette, you admit it as a full pay family. You'd not be receiving financial aid under that circumstance. But we would notify you, obviously, as part of that admissions process.
Right. The other thing, though, is that you might not qualify for aid that first year, and we enroll you, knowing that it's possible in your daughter's time at Marlborough, she may become a financial aid recipient.
Right.
But it's important to apply now. Get yourself into the process. That's what I would say about that. Ooh, how do we know if the school has received the information from SSS? Is it only after you lock the application in SSS, then we know that the information has been received and being reviewed by the school?
Well, I'm sorry to answer that. You have to complete the application. The thing is that SSS will actually get in touch with you if there are pieces missing. We monitor the families who are applying for aid because we know who they are, and we, if Jeanette is interested in your daughter coming to Marlborough, she'll ask me about the status of the financial aid application, and if it isn't showing up, we can follow up. And while I said earlier that if you have questions about the aid process for Marlborough, you can call Jeanette if it's more admissions related, and you call me if it's more financial aid related. But for technical issues, or if you're wondering if your application is complete, SSS has a helpline, and they're very good, and you can call them and find out. And if you have technical questions about the aid, what you're doing in your application, or how to fill out a form, they're the people to call, as opposed to me. For one thing, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be not in the office. But for another, they have the technical expertise to help you get through those situations. And if you have a unique circumstance, they can help you work through it. So if you're concerned about that, you can always call them and find out. We really endeavor to make sure that the students we know are applying for aid, and we can see everyone who started an application and hasn't finished it. So if that's a concern, we can follow up as well. But I'd also say to take that on yourself a little bit and follow up with them if you're concerned.
I love this question. If we put down on our application that our ability to contribute is $20,000, but the school determines that we only qualify for $8,000, will the school still provide an offer with $8,000 in aid? Or does the school will not provide an offer since we asked for 23 and the school $20,000 and the school can only offer 8,000?
The answer is generally we will provide provide the lesser of the aid that is calculated by SSS or the aid that is asked for by a family. So if you, for easy math, let's assume that tuition is $40,000. If you say you can pay $20,000 and you want $20,000 of aid, and SSS says you can pay $30,000 and so we should give $10,000 aid, we will probably give $10,000 of aid unless there's something that, and there are times when we might think SSS has missed something, and we'll ask them to go back and look if there's a huge gap between what's being offered and what's being calculated. But generally, we'll go with what the estimated family contribution is. Now, the flip side is that if you say you can pay $30,000, SSS says you can pay $20,000, we will probably take the $30,000 because there's an assumption that there may be some outside source that's not showing up in SSS. Again, this is why that description, the comment field is really helpful. If you have there's a grandparent who's willing to throw in a few $1,000s, that should be specified and make sure that that's all part of the calculation. But generally, we go with the recommendation, and we'll, obviously, if you think that's way off, you can talk to us about that and explain why it's way off, and see if it's something that the algorithm missed. But that's certainly where we start.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I mean, two things. We do have an appeal process, so if the numbers are off, then certainly we encourage you to send a note, ask us to take another look at the file. We will do that. But the second thing is, I mean, the numbers are generally not that. There isn't generally a wide gap. If you're, to John's point, being transparent and providing all the information that's required, there's usually not that much of a gap. And if there is, again, we can have conversations around that.
One of the questions that's asked here is, will the child feel safe to share their whole selves, even if they aren't wealthy? Marlborough just embarked on a strategic planning process last year. The Board of Trustees did. And the vision statement that came out of it is equity leads education. So there's a couple of things I want to share with you. One is to go back to our virtual visit center and watch the alumni webinar, because there are a couple of alums there who spoke very personally about their being on financial aid at Marlborough and the experience that they had. We're also a community that thinks it's really important that every student on our campus feels like the student belongs. And so we think very carefully about events, simplifying things. We changed the way that we used to be a school that had tuition and then, $25 for this and $10 for that and $15 for this. And we really wrapped all of those costs into one charge so that students aren't coming to school with the opportunity to participate in something if they have money or not. And I'd say that's the same with our parent events, wanting to be sure that, like I said, every family that comes to Marlborough really feels like this is her school. What else? Oh, what is the time? Oh,
Timeline.
So I'm sorry, we're going to add something to that, Nick?
No, I was just going to say there's a question on the timeline.
Yeah. What is the timeline for the decision making and admissions notification? The 2020 tax year is an important piece of data. Doesn't the April 15th deadline prevent 2020 data from being included in your award decisions? So the admissions decisions are going to be mailed out March 5th for families applying to grades 9 through 11 and March 12th for students applying to grades 7 and 8. Those students who are admitted who qualify for financial aid are going to receive their financial aid awards, excuse me, with their enrollment decisions.
And I talked about that a little bit. We understand that the tax form won't be in, but you should be able to by then have confirmed at least some of your income, especially if you are a salaried employee. I understand if you have a business, it gets messier, and that gets into one of those situations where we have to take some things on faith, and that gets back to Nick's point that when the taxes come in, if there's a material difference between what the taxes are telling us and what the application told us, then we might have another conversation. But if it's fundamentally confirming what you said before, then we just move forward with the award that we calculated earlier in the year.
Will the SSS calculated contribution amount take into consideration where we live? Like someone from Kansas applying versus someone from Los Angeles applying with the same facts? Will the SSS calculated contribution amount be the same?
Yes, there's a housing allowance difference. There's a cost of living adjustment for being in Los Angeles, and the cost of living is specific to you because you have to tell us how much you're paying in rent or mortgage, and how much you pay for groceries and all the other costs that are involved in having children. So it takes all that into account. And yes, you are not treated the same as someone who is in Kansas applying to a school where their mortgage, their mortgage might be 30 to 50% of what a mortgage here is, if not less.
John, can you remind us again what years of tax returns we're looking for?
So we're looking for 2018 and 2019, and we expect those to be in by the deadline, and 2020 as soon as possible after the deadline. Those are the 3 years.
Can you talk about the payment plans once a family enrolls?
So there are 3 payment plans. There's a single pay. Most families on financial aid do not pay in one lump sum for obvious reasons. It would be difficult to justify financial aid if you can do that. Then there's a 2-pay plan where you pay half in June and half in December, and then there's a 9-pay plan that goes from June through February. If you're on a payment plan, you're required to have tuition insurance. So 1% charge that has a defined benefit. If your daughter has to drop out of school, depending on the circumstances, it gives you a refund. The enrollment agreement is pretty clear that you're committing to pay the tuition for the year no matter what. And so the tuition insurance is required for people on payment plans to protect you and the school in case something comes up. So those are the 3 plans, and that's what goes along with it. There's also a finance charge that goes along with payment plans as well. And we haven't determined the interest rate for that. It was 3% this past year.
Oh shoot, it just dropped out of my head. What costs are, other than tuition, what else is covered by financial aid?
I'll probably leave some out, but the big one will be bus. We have a technology allowance. You get to buy a laptop. I forget how many, it's 3 or 4 years, but your financial aid percentage covers that percentage of a laptop and accessories up to, I think, $1,500 right now. Books, same thing. You get the percentage of aid applied to any books for school. Nick, I'm forgetting stuff. So if you're,
I think the best way to think about it is it's essentially everything but food services, right? So cafeteria is not included in that we don't have a built-in cafeteria plan. It's not included in tuition, but bus, books, even athletic gear, if your daughter participates in sports, we've made concerted efforts over the last several years to really capture as much of the cost as possible. So there's very little that's actually not included and not supported if you qualify for aid. And there was a previous question about percentage or flat amounts. It is the percentage. So if you qualify for 80% in year 1, it would be 80% across the board. If tuition goes up by some percentage in year 2, and again, you have to reapply and you qualify for 80% in year 2, it's 80% of that higher number. So everything gets adjusted up and corresponds or correlates back to your percentage of 1.
I want to add one other thing to something that Jeanette asked about students feeling comfortable in the school. I will say that also the school continues to look at this, and there are committees that are looking at ways that we can be sensitive to making sure that everyone feels included and isn't, doesn't feel different because they're on aid. And I think the school has made a lot of steps so far, but continues to work on that issue.
The one other fee that I know somebody asked about is financial aid also is applied to the senior fee as well as the new student enrollment fee.
Yeah.
College tour is another great example. The sophomores, juniors do a tour, and same thing, the award applies to that cost as well. So again, very few things that are not covered through the financial aid process in terms of extra costs.
Yeah, really everything that has to do with the Marlborough school experience is covered.
If that's a problem, let us know. We can consider that policy. So.
Okay, do you see often that parents put down the ability to contribute that is lower than the SSS's calculated figures? And will that reduce the chance of getting an offer because the school may feel that the parents may reject the offer due to the aid being lower than what the school plans to offer?
Well, I'd say, I mean, to Nick's point, Nick said that doesn't happen that often. Usually it's pretty close. And no, it doesn't. What we will do is we will decide what we think the appropriate level of aid is. And then we will, if the student is admitted, they'll get an acceptance letter that tells them what that aid is. And then the family gets to calculate if they can do that. And there's a mechanism for appealing. Again, we talked about. So no, again, the SSS is sort of like it's not completely a black box. They actually have like an 80-page description of what their algorithm is, and there are people who have more time than me who have read through all of it. So it's not a complete black box, but it is sort of mysterious because it's a lot of complicated formulas, and your estimate of what you can pay, is probably pretty accurate from your point of view, and it may just be a little bit different, and that's fine. We don't assume that people are trying to take advantage of us if they're offering less than SSS says. We just, we'll just explore that if the time comes, but we'll start with the SSS estimate usually.
I'm going to paraphrase this question that came in. When a family lists what they think that they can contribute to their students' education, is it just for tuition, or is it tuition plus books, transportation, other costs?
It's all in, right? That number should reflect the total amount that you can contribute toward your daughter's education.
Perfect. Another question, who is aware of what students are on financial aid?
It's a pretty small population. 3 of them are on this webinar right now. Most teachers don't know. Most administrators don't know. The only people who know are the people who have to know because it's part of their job. So the person who does student billing obviously knows, but almost no one else in administration or the faculty or the educational side will know if someone's on aid.
As I tell students, it's your news to share. It's not my news to share. And I would also say that students are pretty comfortable because we have such a range of financial aid, or I should say such a range of socioeconomic diversity on our campus. It's not a big secret either. On the website, it says there's a required fixed new student fee of about $3,000 and a senior fee of $2,500. Does financial aid cover this?
Yes.
At your financial aid award percentage.
At your award percentage.
Yep.
So if you get 100% award, you don't have to pay any of those.
My Q&A is empty.
That's not good. There has to be more questions. We have 12 more minutes according to my clock.
Yes, we wouldn't want to let Nick leave early.
Let me go.
I would just go back to my mantra with this is be as transparent as possible, be as open as possible about what's going on, and give us a narrative about your situation and why you need aid. I cannot tell you how helpful it is to have a story that goes along with the numbers, because the numbers are just, someone lives in a house that costs this much, this is their mortgage, this is their property tax, this is what they pay in groceries, they have 3 children. But if you talk about, I was in this job and then I got promoted, and then, I have a young child at home. And one thing I'll say is that we do impute income to non-working parents if they don't have a young child at home. If you have a child that's below, I think, kindergarten, then there's no income added to your application for not working. But if you have children who are essentially out of the house and in school, we do assume income for a spouse, whether or not they're working. Obviously, if they're working, we take that income. But that's just something to know.
Okay, so we gave them a little more time, so now there's a couple more questions. If someone was forgot to add a school code earlier today and now wants to add a school code, do you know how to go back and fix that?
That would be a question for SSS.
Okay.
Just call up their helpline and say, this is what I have to do, and they'll help you.
Yeah, I think they can make that change on the back end directly, in fact.
Perfect. Okay, there's a question about the waitlist process with financial aid, and I'm assuming that's if you're a waitlisted student in the admissions process. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to look to see who we're going to bring into the class, and if we're going to admit your child and you qualify for financial aid, we also have to have that financial aid money to give to you. So we will not take a student off the wait list for admissions if we don't also have money to go with that. I love this question. Do you ask more of families in terms of volunteering if they are receiving aid? The families needing assistance may have heavy workloads and find it difficult to volunteer in copious amounts, even if they want to. And we absolutely agree. Families who are invited to come to Marlborough are invited to come to Marlborough, and there's no greater expectation or lesser expectation based on how much financial aid you receive. Can I keep updating the PFS as I have new information, or at some point is the PFS, which is the parent financial statement, locked and I can't update it anymore?
So the answer to that is generally the PFS remains open. There have been times in my past, it hasn't happened in Marlborough, but in the previous life, where people were messing around with the PFS well into after it should have been closed, and we locked it. But generally it's open. And what I'd say is if you have new information that's material, you should update the PFS and just also shoot me a note, and say, I've changed the PFS because X, and that will help us process it. Again, transparency and communication are the watchwords.
If one parent is planning a change in jobs but is currently employed, should we include that and explain in the comments section?
Absolutely. Anything that you expect will change or know will change for, if you have a job, let's say you have a contract that goes through October, and you expect that the contract will be picked up, but if it's not, all that stuff should be in there. And the thing is that we may grant aid assuming that you will get the contract at the same level, but we also have the information now. So if something changes, you can come to us and say, here's what happened, and we can look at it. So going back to just tell us. You almost can't tell us too much. And you can tell us too much, but not generally about your financial situation.
Can financial aid also cover uniforms and other basic non-expensive necessities? So financial aid does not cover uniforms, although I will tell you that it's fast becoming a culture at Marlborough to recycle uniforms. And for us, the uniform is a gray skirt for students, a gray skirt in the middle school, a black skirt in the upper school. As you can imagine, when our seniors graduate, they give us back their gently used black skirts. And when students move from the middle school to the upper school, they again give back their gently used gray skirts. Students can also wear black pants. Usually that equates to black jeans. They wear athletic shoes. I think it's white or black, maybe gray socks. They tend to wear white polos on top, and then lots of school sweatshirts. Because of COVID right now, and some parents telework, so we're not paying daycare. That will be revised when the pandemic ends. So I'm going to guess you're going to say, put that in the comment section, John. Yeah.
In your comment section, yeah, absolutely. And this is just a hard year generally. It's a hard year for people to live through. It's a hard year to evaluate. Yeah, but yes, put it in the comments.
Can I request a waiver for the financial aid application fee? And if so, how does that work?
I'm actually not, I mean, yes, I think SSS has its own waivers, and then I don't know if there's anything that if we've paid for any on our own.
No, it actually, my understanding is it happens automatically based on the information that you enter into your application, based on your income information. What if we were able to save more because of COVID, but will not have the same rate once things are back to normal? How does this impact our position this year for aid?
I mean, again, it sort of depends on how material that change is. I mean, I'm living, not going out to dinner as much as I used to, so that's a savings. But and there's some areas where we're spending less money. There's some areas where we're spending more money. Again, just mark it down what you think is going to happen. I mean, I think the assumption that people have is that next year will be a mostly normal school year in terms of people attending school, whether it's public schools or independent schools. And so the cost structure of people's lives will be similar to before the pandemic, even if behaviors may have to change. So, I would just mark it down and say that when school returns and is in person, these costs will recur in our lives this much, and we can take that into account.
And then someone asked again about applying for financial aid and how it affects a student's admissions decision. And I'm going to try to do a better job this time. It does put, if a student qualifies for financial aid, it does put her into a more competitive pool. Fortunately, we have a pretty robust budget. And so as we go through the list of those families, those students who are admitted, we get pretty deep into those who also requiring financial aid. But there's a point where we have to stop, and then students below that mark go onto our wait list and wait list for everything. I think that's it. And I think that we are at right before 7 o'clock, everybody. So great job for providing us with enough substantive information to get to 7 o'clock. But it's not over. So John, Nick, Jeanette, everybody on our teams are available to answer questions for you. For financial aid questions, make sure that I say this correctly, John. It's financial.aid@marlborough.org.
Yes.
For admissions.
On the website too. So rather than trust my memory and Jeanette's, you can look on the website, and I think that email address is in the financial assistance section of the website. Yep,
that's right. So I'm on the website right now, financial.aid@marlborough.org. For admissions, it is admissions@marlborough.org. And for SSS, to go directly to them, it's sss@communitybrands.com. And like we said, all of that information is on our website. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. You asked wonderful questions. I hope that we all gained an opportunity to learn more about the financial aid process. Whether you're applying to Marlborough this year or in the future, we're looking forward to spending more time with you. Have a wonderful holiday break, and we will see you all in the new year. Thank you for being with us.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.